I've invited Will because this is his third year towards setting up the customer success program. And he actually has sort of like a 4-year program as soon as he started setting up the practice at Delphix. And I wanted you guys to see how he went through setting it up and how thoughtful he lined it up vis-a-vis like a maturity model. Before we start, I'd like to remind everyone, subscribe to our YouTube channel for all the great videos that we produce on customer success. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to Will Rahim. Will is a dear friend, used to be a client of mine, also the Senior VP of Customer Success at Delphix, and has been running the customer success among other teams at Delphix for a few years now.
Yeah, Reed, thank you for the invite. So honored to be here. As a way of introduction, I'm the SVP of Customer Success at Delphix. I've been at Delphix for about 4.5 years. And when I arrived at Delphix, there was not a customer success organization per se. I'll speak to that a little bit later. Bits and pieces of groups that were focused on customers were siloed and fragmented across the company. Prior to Delphix, I was SVP of Customer Experience at CD Networks. And then prior to that, I was VP of Services and Support at Sega, which was acquired by Oracle. And then even going back further, I was at Sun Microsystems and Oracle for 16 years in various roles and capacities, but always focused on the customer experience. So whether it was on the delivery side, on the business side, or operations. With me on the call today, and I think Beth Fulton's on. Beth's our VP of Customer Success. Delphix is the leader in data ops. We help customers with application modernization, cloud migration, release microdization, which is basically accelerating the release cycle, and then really ultimately getting into that AI ML operational state. Our business model is subscription based, and we have both on-prem and cloud products. We cater to the enterprise world, and where our products are widely deployed across 23 of the Fortune 100 companies. We're 10 years old, have about 500 or so employees. I think, in fact, we crossed that 500 number, I think, last week. And we actually have about the same number of customers. I think we're like 475 after our last quarter. And the customer success org is approaching, we are right around 100, if not past 100. And we expect to grow that team, the customer success organization, about 30 or so percent in 2021. So just I wanted to give everybody sort of just a view of Delphix, ARR business. We've had despite COVID, we've actually had a really, really, really good 2020. And some of that can be attributed to, I think, we as a company have evolved and are much better at taking care of our customers. So we're not leaking. Our churn numbers are really, really good. So our net retention numbers have been trending in the right direction the last 2 years. I want to go back and sort of rewind the clock back to 2008 when we just formed the customer success organization. I think Beth and I were, I want to say, was it Fort Lauderdale, SKO, and we were just talking about basically this slide right here. We, as an organization, customer or functions that were focused on customer sat, loyalty, enablement, adoption, were scattered throughout the company, reporting either into sales, services, support was reporting into engineering. They were fragmented. So they were siloed. They lacked really an integrated approach to customer management. And I think more importantly, the voice of the customer was absent and not really represented at the exec table. We didn't have clean data and didn't really know what to do with what we had. So this is sort of where we were in 2018, very reactive. We really did not have a line of sight to a lot of our customers. We are an enterprise software company, and so the bulk of our customers are enterprise customers. But we really didn't have a good sense of who our customers were, their health, sentiment, how they were using the product, what use cases they were deploying, what value we were driving within these companies. Customer intelligence data was, like I said, fragmented. So that was sort of the source of truth. And really the driver for the formation of the customer success team was that we had a tendency to get blindsided by these big churn bombs last day of the quarter. And oftentimes we had to rely on heroics, whether it was on the sales side of the house or CS side of the customer success managers at the time to sort of salvage renewals. We did continue to have a world-class support organization, but I think at that time, a lot of people confused support with CS. And so anyway, so this is sort of where we were in 2018. We were also careful not to attempt to solve these issues by just hiring and throwing bodies at these problems without really having the foundational elements in place. Our approach was, let's just have a game plan first. It took us probably, 6 months to really come up with a plan that we felt was going to persist across org changes, leadership changes, if any, business changes. And so it was important that we had a game plan. And this is where, we obviously leveraged a lot of the resources that we had. We had a lot of guidance from Rahim and CSM practice, TSIA, members of TSIA. We also leveraged a lot of their research there. And so it was really making sure that we had a game plan, but not just a plan for that year. We really had a 3-year roadmap. And that roadmap, we wanted to make sure from day one, when, for instance, I was in front of the board or in front of the executive team, I was very clear about expectations. This is what we're going to do. The first 2 quarters, this is what we're going to do. The following 2 quarters, this is what we're going to do in years 2, years 3. Because what I didn't want people to expect that as soon as we had this organization formed and we had ample coverage, that all of these problems were going to go away. And so our plan was really build a foundation, focus on the customer journey mapping, and make sure that we identify those moments of truth. And I'll share with you guys a couple of slides on that, the wow experiences. And then hire CSMs with the right skill sets, leadership skills and track record and enterprise software. At that time in 2018, that profile for a CSM hire today, I think, has evolved. And then make sure that we put in place, playbooks and templates and success plans, so very prescriptive. And one thing that's near and dear to me is really build a data-driven customer success model so that everything is, built and driven by data. This is where we were in 2018. Oh, and by the way, I'm sure some of you are probably wondering, our churn rates at this time were probably, it's fair to say we're probably in the teens, I think maybe 13, 14%, gross churn. And so obviously, as you guys know, if you really want a sustainable business model and continue to grow and drive net retention, you've got to bring that churn down. And it's got to be single digits. Our goal this year, for instance, is 5%. That's the target for this year. So in 2 years, we've we've gone from about 14%. This year will be single digits, probably about 7.5%. Then next year, we expect to be around 5%. So how do we do that? So if you look at this maturity model here, it's fair to say that at the start, back in 2018, we were at best reactive, and at best, we were sort of in churn mitigation mode. Customer experience was unpredictable. We had very little structure in place. And so it was survival mode. And so we knew we could no longer sustain our business without really driving maturity into our business. I know Beth and I, and I'm sure countless other people at Delphix lost a lot of sleep over that. And so we put together this 5-year plan that would take us from, hair on fire, which is sort of where we were. And this is where I think having guidance and the foresight of people who've been there and done that and has helped, because we sort of had the North Star in mind. We knew where we were, but it wasn't always clear. We didn't always have a lot of clarity in terms of where we needed to get. And that endpoint really was about getting to a point where we're driven, we're a customer of an organization of customer advocacy, and that advocates are really mobilized and energized and fueled by these wow moments, right, throughout that customer journey. And not just with Delphix, obviously, but with any of their vendors and partners. And so I think, today, if you were to do an honest and fair self-assessment, put us somewhere between proactive and predictive, right? I mean, I think there are days where I feel like, we're super, super predictive. And in fact, even transformed. There are days I feel, listen, this is where we need to be. This is where we are. And so the reason I'm sharing this with you is I think it's important as for companies that are thinking about starting or sort of overhauling or redoing customer success, that you do have a multi-year plan. Doesn't necessarily need to look like that, because it'll vary depending on your customers, your customer profile, product complexity, in just the space that you're in. But I think it's important that you actually have a multi-year plan that's also socialized and validated by the executive team, by the board, because you keep coming back and using this sort of as a reference point. So this is sort of where we were, and this is the maturity model that we established in 2018. Yeah.
This is the same slide you presented to the board and the executives back in 2018, if I recall correctly. Mm-hmm. And did you get any pushback about a 4 or 5 year plan back in the day? Because I can tell you, I work with executives all the time in setting up the customer success practice at their businesses. And even if I tell them, look, this is going to take a year or two, I get some pushback. But what kind of reaction did you get? And would you recommend other customer success executives to actually lay down a 3-4 year plan?
That's a really good question. Listen, everybody wanted different outcomes that they, yesterday, right? So patience is not what we're known for here at Delphix. I think the reason that it was received positively was because for the previous 6 months, I had been socializing it and I had been talking about how difficult this is. And I want to make sure they understood, right, that it's not just about, because if it was just a question of headcount, yes, we could have probably added 30 CSMs in the first year. But I said, listen, I can bring in, Beth and I can hire 30 CSMs. The problem is if you don't have all the foundational stuff in place, if you don't have the tools, the infrastructure, the systems, data cleaned up, you're not going to optimize that. You're not going to maximize on that. So I wouldn't say there was a lot of pushback. And I think one of the reasons was that I also made it very clear that, for instance, looking back, one of the expectations we set was that by the end of the first year, we would have a much better view of our customers, who they were, how they're using our product, and their overall health. We actually over-delivered on that. Within the first 5 months, we actually had that. And so I went back to the board and said, listen, this is what our customers look like. This is what they think of us, right? This is their overall health. Listen, I'm a firm believer in, under promising and over delivering. And so they're and we also happen to be fair. I think it's important that we as an organization had a really strong ally in our CEO who was a strong believer in customer success and really entrusted myself, Beth, and others, other leaders in the organization to really operationalize this. This is the roadmap. And then what I wanted to do was sort of capture elements that are critical, sort of success factors, right? So the backbone of any customer success operation is access accurate data, consistent processes, having the right technology, and having a feedback loop that's going to drive improvements into your operations. What we do is we sort of assess our maturity every quarter against these elements. And so from a technology perspective, we knew early on that we needed to invest and, we needed to do better than, spreadsheets and ERPs, right? So we actually started out in that, and then we used our CRM for probably a year or so to really track customer success attributes at the account level. But we also knew that sooner or later, we would need to sort of make that leap to invest in a true CS platform. And so we evaluated probably about a half a dozen platforms before deciding on Gainsight. And actually, got a lot of sort of guidance and advice throughout that process from CSM practice. So that's, I think, important. So we went from spreadsheets, about 2 years ago, we actually launched Gainsight. We've continued to invest in that. And it's now sort of become, for the bulk of the customer facing teams, it's sort of become the source of truth, and people need to know what's going on with a customer, what's the latest update, what's their health, product usage. Our customer success platform it's the place to go. The other thing that I think is important is, in terms of having access to accurate data, is it allows you to really build workflows, automation, early warning systems. And so today we have much of this automated. But to be fair, I still think we've got a long ways to go. This is a work in progress, and we need to continue to evolve as our business grows. But because we spend a ton of time, energy, and cleaning up our data, sort of establishing, the source of truth, we're able to now actually put some of these principles into practice. And then from a strategy perspective, like I said earlier, we really started out as a, sort of focused on churn mitigation. Over the years, we become much more proactive, meaning we have insights, but also a line of sight to all of our customers, their tendencies and propensities to either grow, right, or not grow. And so we've become much more, I think now as an organization, we're focused on driving the right outcomes for our customers and no longer about just that next renewal. And so this is really a huge difference maker, because when you start talking about value, customer value, it in a lot of ways it sort of defends the renewal, right? The upcoming renewal, whether it's for $1 million or $5 million. And oftentimes it's a great way and a great opportunity and gateway to really start conversations about expanding our footprint. And so we use a platform called Ecosystems, which collaboratively with our customers. I think that's the important point. We are able to quantify and track the value that's delivered by Delphix. So if you can sort of see the evolution of the organization, it was really sort of churn mitigation and really just focused on renewals. So we're now having conversations with customers about value, and it's value and the ROIs that customers have actually bought into. So anyway, I think that's important. And then establishing, from a process perspective, establishing customer journey maps has really given us a much more standardized approach. And it's probably at this point, in your company's evolution, it's at this point that you make that transition from reactive to a proactive model. As soon as you actually have a prescriptive, you've got all of your playbooks documented, CTAs, everything, and whatever tool it is that you're using, whatever platform. So if it's a CSM in some, remote corner of the world, regardless of customer tier or customer success segment, you're more or less giving that customer a consistent experience, right? And so that's really, when you start doing that, that's that inflection point. That's the transition from going from a reactive to proactive. And then with all of this stuff in place, you're now really, your organization has become focused on driving expansions and advocacy, within your accounts rather than just managing a book of renewals. So where we are today, like I said, I think we're sort of, in that predictable stage. I don't know, Beth, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, we actually have a few questions for you and Beth.
Thank you for sharing this, by the way. What I did want to ask is, as part of the success maturity, how does this scale as your customers mature, your organization also internally matures, and the size of the customer portfolio increases, right? How does that change and how often does this change?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think this is sort of where we are today. I'll actually elaborate on that. But this is sort of, last year, about second half of the year, we realized the model that we have in place and the strategy we have in place really is focused on our high touch enterprise accounts, right? And so as our install base grows, and we continue to refine our segmentation, right? We need to make sure that we've got a more hybrid approach. And so it scales in the sense that a lot of what we have already built and created, right, is going to be leveraged regardless of segment. The discernible difference really is whether it's going to be really, really high touch and human led versus it's going to be more digital led, right? But in terms of content and collateral, there's a lot of overlap. Beth, feel free to chime in.
Exactly as Will was saying, the approach to the customer for us doesn't really change, whether you're just that real high touch or a lower touch model. In CS presentations, you see the high touch, mid touch, low touch, or no touch, digital touch types of approaches. Because our product is fairly complex and technical, we definitely don't see a digital only type of approach, but we can automate to scale. So taking the best practices from what we've been doing already and identifying where we can automate to assist our CSM so they can manage, work with a higher number of customers, a larger portfolio from a customer number perspective. That's where our focus is. So taking all the lessons learned and best practices, and now it's just where can we automate? And that's not going to be just for that team, because we've actually created a separate team. But taking those best practices and then pulling it up to our high touch team as well, so they can selectively use what we're calling digital assist, so that we can scale and make sure that any time that we're spending with a customer is high value, and we're really driving customer adoption and customer usage and understanding their use cases.
So really two questions. The first one was around your playbooks and whether you developed your own template or if you had a standard template. And when you just spoke about automation, what was the hardest area or task that you found to automate? And why was it so hard?
So as far as the playbooks, we started with generic playbooks, and then we have started personalizing those or customizing those to Delphix and our needs. So we did use standard playbooks as a starting point. And as we started using them, we've refined them over time. So they have become really our playbooks at this point. And we've worked internally with multiple teams from a handoff perspective to make sure that we're covering all segments of that customer journey. And as far as the automation piece, the hardest part is just getting started, just creating that plan and not trying to do everything at once, but honing in on where am I going to get the most value for the most team members and the most customers immediately. So identifying that and being patient, just like Will's overall approach to the customer success organization, coming down, being patient and doing something successfully first, and then continuing to build out.
We're just wondering in terms of the process, the frameworks around automation, and perhaps even the challenges that you faced by setting it up, the automation side of things.
I want to come back, and I think the most challenging and difficult part and the toughest nut to crack, honestly, is data. I'll speak to that in a little bit here. And so you can't do any automation. You can't think about doing that unless you have clean data, access to real-time data, the source of truth, that you've actually now, aggregated customer intelligence data that probably sits across many, many, many platforms, right? So you've got to have all those integration points, and then to actually talk about automation. Otherwise, it's just really it's going to be a bunch of scripts, right? That, that serves one function or one purpose. But the key is that if you don't have your data cleaned up and data in place, it's going to be very difficult downstream, whether it's 6 months or a year and a half or two, to actually then be able to interact with that data. And the key is you want to make sure that you have the ability to interact with that data. And that's what ultimately drives automation. And then to take it one step further, so if you look at, for instance, that previous slide about stage 5 or that maturity model, it's about being in that transformed state, which means you're leveraging now AI and machine learning and all of that. But none of that is possible, if you don't trust the data. So this slide right here is into Isabel's question about scaling the org. What we did is I went back, and this is a slide that we've sort of been maintaining for the last couple of years, but sort of went back to sort of the beginning of time, if you will, and said, what are activities and tasks and milestones we needed to really focus on and prioritize, early on at the very beginning. How are we going to segment our customers? How are we going to comp our folks? What's that financial model look like to justify the investments? What does it take to, again, transform into a truly world-class organization? So those are the questions that we were asking ourselves early on. And the first order of business really was around data. And so for us, customer success is, and I think I've heard this from Nick Mehta, customer success is deeply rooted in data and analytics. Our priority, one of the very first things we did is actually we seeded the customer success operations team. So we hired someone that come in and really be our very first CS ops person. Some of you may know him, Todd Massey, who's sort of well known in the customer success community. It was sort of a team of 1 or 2. We're now, I think we have 6 people in the CS ops side of the house that are responsible for, systems, infrastructure, tools, but more importantly, data, curating data and then exposing it, to the right elements. So, and this will continue to be a priority for us. And then once we had that team seated, then we then shifted our focus to our customers, right? So we designed and then rolled out a customer health score. That was maintained in Google Sheets. I think I remember sharing that with you, Reed, on a flight to a conference somewhere, and it was like 50 or maybe 25 factors. And so we actually went through this, very, we painstakingly, assessed every single customer and then assigned a health score on a spreadsheet early on. And this was really to sort of establish a baseline and activate, the engagement and segmentation strategies downstream. And then once we had all of that in place, actually in parallel, right, we looked at establishing, corporate data policies, right, that encompassed compliance, privacy, governance, access, privileges. This is still a work in progress. We really haven't finished this, and this continues to sort of evolve and morph here at Delphix. But one of the things we really spent a lot of time early on was sort of determining the source of truth for customer data. You have to establish where customer data, particularly the revenue data, where it sits, who has access to it, who owns it, and then how it feeds into all of the systems, again, downstream. And so early on, it was really, the focus was on data and making sure that we had the operational acumen within the company, but more importantly within customer success, to then be able to do all of the other things that you see here on this timeline. But I honestly cannot emphasize the value and importance of investing in establishing data policies. Again, just determining things like, for instance, how and where data can be shared cross-functionally, right? Oversight and ownership of data aggregation, things like that. And so those were things that we sort of did early on. Staffing strategy, we had this very, very elegant and sophisticated, actually, a coverage model that Scott Klimek, who's our VP of Customer Operations, built, where I could literally, based on customer growth, right, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, I could plug in some numbers and it would tell me, based on our model and our ratios, how many CSMs I would need in years 1, 2, 3. And so when you present that level of data, right, that's not just sort of a guess to the board, to your executive team, they buy into it, right? Because it's not just, you're not interested in just hiring and building teams. You're interested in doing it with discipline, but driven by data. So this sort of is, this is the blueprint that we've used. And listen, we're like, 2021, we're doing, to Beth's point earlier, the low touch, digital touch model. We kicked that off about, 2-3 months ago. So that's sort of, we're about to launch that. Our customer advisory board, we're focused on that. And we're now increasingly more and more focused on customer success marketing. We want to make sure that we're not oversaturating customers with information. There's no information overload, that we are, in fact, have an integrated, orchestrated, coordinated approach with marketing, customer success, sales, and how we connect and engage with our customers. So this is sort of where we are today.
I was just curious about organizationally how you guys relate to sales.
In fact, here, if you look at the slide right here, our customer success is separate from sales. We report directly to the CEO, as does sales. And so when it comes to so customer success under its purview includes support, our onboarding teams, customer education, operations, and our CSM team. And then from a customer management perspective, the account exec and the CSM oftentimes, partner to manage an account, but different reporting lines. And the reason we did that is because, we want to make sure that in terms of just essentially all teams are focused on driving customer loyalty and customer satisfaction, adoption, enablement, that they're all under one umbrella. And so that's, allows you to, it removes, quite honestly, a lot of the artificial barriers and silos. And so the org structure needs to reflect that. And then more importantly, you have a voice at the table, right? So that's sort of the organizational structure that we put in place. That was on day one in 2018, and it's still in effect. I'm going to take like 2 minutes to cover this. Our structure really is aligned with this unified and integrated blueprint. So if you view it from a customer perspective, what they want is they want you to connect with them. They want you to wow them and delight them. And then, they want you to take care of them and lead them, right? And so connecting with them means you're enabling your customers, right, to achieve, this includes digital activities, knowledge, community, education. And so that's our education and ops team, right? This is where the importance of data, the importance of operations, comes into play, because you're not going to be able to do any of that. And this is really low cost, right? This is low cost tech touch. And then you can do all of that perfectly. They're still going to run into problems, right? So they're going to call in or engage you. And then when they do, they want to be wowed, right? And that's where your customer support organization comes in. And that's all, again, this is a moment of truth, and it's all about CSAT. That's enough, right? So customer expectations today are very different than 10, 15 years ago. For instance, when I worked at Sun and Oracle, they still haven't figured it out, I don't think. And that they want you to connect with them more than just digitally or being responsive to their needs. They really want you to take care of them, right? This is where your CSM team comes in, right? They drive loyalty, nurture advocates, and really, maximize that investment. And then if you do all of these things, right, you are in a position to lead your customers. And this is where upsell and cross-sell opportunities come in, right? This actually is a blueprint that I've used in my last 3 companies, right? And so you sort of modify and adjust it, but fundamentally it's the same thing, which is sort of an integrated CS approach.
Thanks, Will. This is really, really interesting. Seems like you got a really, really great understanding of how to predict the behavior for enterprise customers. I'm kind of curious what you think the next 5 years are going to look like. How do you envision customer success practice for this segment, particularly in the next 5 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've actually been asking that question ourselves. I think it's all about data, product usage data, instrumentation, as that gets more and more sophisticated, right? And a lot more the ability to basically leverage APIs to then tap into different products and solution, and really, so I think it's taking data to the next level. That's going to be the next sort of evolution in customer success and that ultimately gets you to that really predictable stage where historical data, and customers' tendencies, past behaviors will drive your actions, right? Not that that's not in place. I mean, there are some companies that actually have very sophisticated sort of models in place. But I think that's really going to be, the difference. The one thing that I know will not change is all of that automation, all of that, the value of the CSM, that human touch, right, is not something that is ever going to be displaced or diminished, right? At the end of the day, we find that a lot of our customers, it's great that they know that we have a lot of intelligence and data on them, but they value that human touch, right? So, and I don't think that will fundamentally change in the next 5 years. Beth, I don't know if you have a perspective on that question.
A very specific one. I think probably the biggest area for us to understand is we've gone back and forth on renewals and expansion and where that will be in the future. I would say over the next 5 years, that's something that could change the way we work with our enterprise customers, where maybe we have a team focused more on renewals to free up our sales team to focus on new business. So that's probably one area that I see potentially changing in the next 5 years.
Thank you so much, Beth and Will. Thank you, everyone.